We've seen it so many times that most of us don't even think about it anymore. The media talks politics and presents the two sides, a Democrat and a Republican. In reality, those aren't the two sides because a much, much larger slice of America does not identify with either party. The American plurality, close to a majority at this point, is, if anything, treated as an afterthought. And that is just one way that the media fails to cover independence. There's more. Right now, there are legal battles underway between the political parties and people who want to give independents much more of a say in American politics. But those battles are getting very little attention. A listener to this show is working with one of the leading organizations of independent voters. She got in touch and said their head legal strategist would love to come on and talk about the media's role in all this. Today, Chad Peace of the Independent Voter Project, a group that has played a big role in changing how elections happen across the country. He has a lot to say about how the media's political narratives prevent us from seeing reality.
Why don't they talk about the raw number of people that actually decided what they're suggesting to their audience is like this big wave of everybody woke up and wanted to be a socialist today?
He also explains how California's gubernatorial election fits in and how the media helped spread panic about it. We also discuss the power of imagery in the news and how that hurts independent voters as well. Plus, just last week, I was telling you about how the Obama administration had subpoenaed journalists. Well, now the Trump administration has done so. This involves the new Air Force One plane, which is a giant gift from Qatar. I'll talk you through how this story reflects not only intrusions on the press, but also the media's own failures. Coming up today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. So great to have you here on They Stand Corrected, my little podcast taking on a huge topic, media failure, by fact-checking the news giants and telling you the things they get wrong. Oh, my name is Josh Lebs. Hi, welcome if you're new. I see a map sometimes that shows who is becoming a part of this community here. It is very cool. People all over the country, around the world. Thank you for joining me here. If you're new, you should know there is a newsletter that comes along with this show. I don't expect you to take my word for anything. Definitely get the newsletter. It is free. And you can get extra and unlimited content by becoming a paid subscriber. That's the best way to support this show, help make it possible. More to come about that. But I want to jump right into this really important topic. In general, in the news, politics boils down to lots of horse race stuff about two parties constantly at each other. In reality, though, more Americans than ever are identifying as independents. According to Gallup earlier this year, 45% of Americans call themselves independents. Even more recently, just weeks ago, CNN polling showed 47%. And then the remaining close to a half, although not all of them, distribute between the two major political parties, which means the plurality, the largest number of Americans are independents, and not often there in news coverage. Chad Peace is the legal representative for the Independent Voter Project. Here's how he describes the group.
We try to make the election process serve voters instead of political parties. We just believe that we've created a system that legally incentivizes partisanship. And that's because it makes political parties the building blocks of our election process. And the Independent Voter Project, through initiatives like California's nonpartisan primary and lawsuits that we filed in multiple states, are simply just trying to assert the right of voters to control the election process.
Lots of headlines talk about how independents often lean right or left. Chad says that misses the point. In the current system, they virtually always only have two options.
I always use this analogy. You take a vegetarian and you say, you know what, you're not going to eat unless you have a hamburger or a hot dog. At some point, they're going to lean hamburger or hot dog because they got to eat. And they don't really want either one of them.
It's also usually extremely hard for independent candidates to get on a ballot. It can be very expensive, very onerous, and they don't have party machines behind them with all the money and hired staff and grassroots organizations. That is part of a nature of being independent, not being part of a bureaucratic group. But in our political system, most of the time, it takes one to become a candidate. And in some states, voters are required to register with one of the parties in order to vote in a primary. And in areas that are overwhelmingly Republican or Democrat, the primary is the most important vote because whoever wins that party's primary is pretty much definitely going to win a general election. New York City is a strong example. In the recent elections, several candidates who are aligned with socialist Mayor Zohran Mamdani won high-profile races. Chad points out how few voters were behind that decision. Here's a chunk of our interview.
You were forced to register with the Democratic Party to have any meaningful vote in that process. We then did a poll right after this election, only sent to registered Democrats. We asked the question, why did you join the Democratic Party? Almost half said, well, I'm not really a Democrat. I just did so I could vote. When you look at Latinos, more than half of them say, I'm not really a Democrat. I just registered to vote.
Now I live in Atlanta. I live in Georgia. We don't register for parties here. We just show up on primary day and vote in whichever one we want.
Georgia is better than New York. I'd argue that California is better than both of them because California has a nonpartisan primary where any voter can vote for any candidate, and it's only one of 3 states where you don't get some special right because you've joined a private organization. And in New York, by exercising your First Amendment right of non-association, saying, I'm not going to join that private organization, you've disenfranchised yourself. Yes, you can give a symbolic vote in the general election, but everybody knows the election's already been decided.
How much of that is because of the media, though? I mean, does the media declare people the victor too soon? If the media handle the story differently, might people show up for the general election and have a surprise result?
There's some of that. I think the media is more guilty in that they don't talk about it. Why is the top line story not that New York's primary participation is 9%? Why don't they talk about the raw number of people that actually decided what they're suggesting to their audience is like this big wave of everybody woke up and wanted to be a socialist today? It wasn't like this massive change in how people felt 4 years ago when they elected Eric Adams, or frankly, when a huge swath of them voted for Donald Trump. And then before that, the same people voted for Bernie Sanders, right? Rejection of the status quo is what you're seeing in a lot of these returns. And yes, an engaged, funded, ideologically based movement can capture a relatively small amount of the electorate and create significant political shifts.
Okay, a few things to break down there, because we should have heard all this in the news. And of course we didn't, because independents get very little coverage. He referred to the New York numbers, and yes, that's about right. In the recent primaries in New York that got tons of national attention, the total number of voters that participated was around what he said, around 9%. If you look at just registered voters, it was slightly more than that, but not much more. But there are also, as there are everywhere, lots of people who could be registered voters who don't register to vote. There's a report called The Missing Million that estimates around 1 million people in New York City could register to vote and don't. What Chad's referring to there is how a very small slice of people who could be voting made that decision. And a lot of the news coverage does present it as this is what people suddenly want. Well, the people who are showing up, that's what they want. And some people aren't showing up because they can't, because they're not registered Democrats, or because they're just not interested in any of those candidates. And that race doesn't energize them. He also mentioned California's nonpartisan primaries. His organization was instrumental in bringing that about. Open primaries in California in which everybody votes in the same primary, and whoever the top 2 candidates are go on to face each other in the general election. He also mentioned Trump in there in the 2024 election. Trump got more votes in New York City than he had in the 2 previous elections. He got about a third of votes. Anyway, let's get back to the big picture. Independents, in the sense we're talking about here, are people who don't think of themselves as aligning with either party, even if they officially register for one of them. They're not necessarily moderate. However, in the best data we have, independents overall call themselves moderate more often than Democrats and Republicans do. Around half of independent voters identify as moderate. I have figures on all this stuff for you, which I'll put in the newsletter. Anyway, Chad says when more voters get the chance to participate meaningfully in elections, and that includes these independents, you do end up overall with more candidates who are moderate and fewer ideologues.
Right now, the incentive structure is to outflank the right and the left. I mean, we go and you win in the primary where you have the most ideological voters. That's where the incentives are. When you let everybody vote on an equal playing field, the median gets more towards the middle. Turnout among independents in California for the primary is over 27%. The top candidate was Javier Becerra for governor, who's kind of known as more of a moderate. He's not part of the fringe. He's not a firebrand. Why is California a state where the top vote getter could be somebody who is not out there making TikToks every day to rile people up? Maybe it's because we let everybody vote and we didn't put the incentives over there to be, I'm going to be the champion of this crazy ideology. And so it's a natural, predictable consequence when you allow everybody to participate in the process.
Name recognition is key. The media gets into whatever crazy thing they can get people to click on. So when there is someone who ends up being more moderate or centrist, they're less likely to get attention from media. So then that might dissuade independents from voting also, because someone who gets tons of attention for being far on the right or far on the left is going to inspire people who are more partisan. So are you seeing the media play that role, underplay the candidates who might appeal more to independents?
Correct. 100%. Now, the political complex wasn't behind Becerra. Despite having been the attorney general serving as the top lawyer for the United States of America, he was floating in around 2 or 3%. Why? Because Eric Swalwell, Mr. Trump's the worst person in the world, and all he does is go on MSNBC all day to tell everybody how much he's going to take on Trump, had the name ID, and the media talked about him all the time. But for the scandal that everybody kind of knew was there.
Oh, people knew?
Oh, everybody knew. Everybody on the inside knew. They didn't know the extent, but this is how politics work. They go, well, yeah, but he's going to be the next governor, and I'm going to line up behind him because I don't want to be on the other team. That's how it works. And then the scandal breaks, and everybody goes, well, I didn't really like him anyway. You know, he wasn't that great of a guy. And Javier was in large part the safe choice, whereas you take a lot of these firebrands, it's like everything they say is scripted for Twitter or TikTok. They're not actually interested in governing.
I want the media to focus on what the actual job is. What are the top skills for that job? Help Americans think like people who are hiring in a business. Would you hire this person for this job? Instead, the media complex plays right into what the parties want, which is feelings of identity.
Yeah. The same media that hates Trump is the same media that gave Trump the platform to be president.
He's right. The media did that. You heard him mention Eric Swalwell in there. He was a leading Democratic candidate for governor in California until women came forward with sexual assault allegations. That was before the primary. Question for you. When you think of American politics, what news images come to mind? It turns out that that's a very significant question. The images that don't exist in the news and how that absence skews American political thinking. Coming up. To demand the right actions from our leaders, we have to know the facts. That includes data, and a lot of it comes from the government. What the government tells us about the economy, health, crime, about everything should be true. All too often, it isn't. But we can change that. We have to demand this. We have to act. And we can do something very simple. It only takes 1 minute. I am happy to partner with USA Facts on a petition demanding truth from the government. Thanks to a sponsorship, if you sign this petition today, you'll be helping support this show. It's very brief. You need to use my unique link, which you can find in the show notes and newsletter. Please join me in demanding truthful public data. Sign now. Thanks. There are similarities between Americans giving up on the media and Americans giving up on the two political parties. In fact, those movements are connected. People are fed up with failure, lies, and rage bait. Those descriptors apply to both. Chad Peace works with independents across the country every day. So he knows very well what it is that's driving so many people to join that movement.
They've gotten to the exhaustion level and they're like, I know voting for one of these two sides is not going to be this sudden greatness that they claim it's going to be. They're rejecting the entire system. So like when Trump runs for president saying drain the swamp, that worked, but it gets misinterpreted by the media and Trump himself as if, oh, now they agree with everything I say, because no, it's like most people are not nearly as ideological as our politics suggest. You can't win an election unless you're convinced you're right about everything. Everybody who doesn't agree with you is an idiot, stupid, evil, or something like that. And most people don't live their lives that way. They're asking us to go into a political space and treat it totally differently than we live our lives.
Across the country, leaders of the two major parties are trying to tighten their grip on elections. There are these efforts to reduce opportunities for independent voters to make a real difference. Chad says the media is fueling those efforts by pushing storylines that partisans want them to push. Here's an example he pointed me to. Just a few weeks ago, there were tons of headlines saying that two MAGA Republicans might end up being the only two candidates for governor of California. That, of course, freaked out a lot of people in California, which is heavily Democratic, and freaked out a lot of people around the country. Inside some of the reports, there were disclaimer lines like, oh, by the way, this possibility isn't super likely. Here's a report from CNN.
Could Democrats be in for a California nightmare? Probably not. But the fact that I'm even talking about it is the shocker here. Two MAGA-aligned Republicans could end up being the only two names on the November ballot. So how could that happen in deep blue California? Well, the crowded race for governor has no clear leader. And if support for Democratic candidates remains splintered, that could mean all of them get shut out.
Far more people just see headlines. And that idea, Californians might only have these two choices, spread quickly. Chad says that's because partisans were sending out these announcements and pushing this angle.
That narrative was manufactured. Anybody that could read a poll knew that was never going to happen. The only reason they slightly showed in the top two was because of the Democrats who didn't know who they were going to pick in this crowded field. Even the pollsters that then get quoted by the media doesn't point out the fact that this pollster is a paid operative by the Democratic Party. They go and they push this narrative. If they can rile up the fears of people across the country, and certainly in California, and associate the nonpartisan primary with an outcome they don't like, then they can get rid of it.
That is definitely part of what's happening. There is a proposition now in California aimed at ending the nonpartisan primary. And no surprise, it is backed by partisans from both major parties. That fear that parties have of losing their grip over elections also led to a big decision on the other side of the country. New York now uses ranked choice voting in primaries, but does not use ranked choice voting in general elections.
What New York did was they made a deal with the reform community and said, fine, we'll take in ranked choice voting, but you can only do it in the primary. Because independent candidate in a general election under ranked choice voting would have a pathway to victory.
Images and clips are very powerful. People organize events in which a candidate will say something super partisan and a room full of people scream. Every 4 years, there are these conventions where the parties most faithful, most active come in and cheer. So people are given this impression of support. I can't think of anything similar in which independents get together en masse, providing that kind of image or clip for Americans to see a group of people who are cheering for where way more Americans stand. There's nothing similar for Americans to see and the media to see that says, aha, this group of people is even bigger.
Yeah, and that's why it's slower to develop. I don't know if they're ever going to be like, oh, there's this independent convention or something, right? The one vacation I'm going to take is to some political convention and stuff like that. There's people like with normal lives. But a more bright spot is I think there is becoming an institutional awareness within this small I independent space, and the relationships are built. That's happening. You don't see it in the national media, but I can tell you it is advancing.
What should the big mainstream media be doing to accurately and fairly cover independence in America?
Explain what's actually going on, give some education to folks instead of treating it like a football game, treating it like, why are the Republicans and the Democrats the only one that get to go on the field? Maybe just asking the question, if most of the electorate is over this hyper partisanship, what can we do to incentivize less partisanship? Just asking those questions is something the media can do, but they're part of the game. They got friends in the game, and they don't want to, if they report on this, then they're not going to get a quote, and they're not going to go to the cocktail party. It's an institutional problem, and there's a great fear in stepping outside of the institution, because once you do, you're blacklisted. Well, I do political consulting. I do political communications. I'm devoutly nonpartisan. I don't have many colleagues. I have lots of friends who are very good people, smart. They're Republican consultants, they're Democrat consultants. I've worked with them when I can. A lot of times there'll be an initiative or there'll be something where they need independence. They'll hire me. And they've told me they'd love to work on things I do, but they won't, because they will get blacklisted by a lot of their other clients. And it's like, good luck. Let me know what I can do, not publicly.
Of course not. Coming up, New York Times journalists get subpoenaed. Why this does signal a danger against press freedom, but also puts the media's hypocrisy into the spotlight. But first, something we all should do right away. As you know from this show, one of the worst, most dangerous effects of news failure is how it fuels hate movements, especially anti-Semitism. The media is serving as an open mic night for propagandists, pro-terror radicals, and lots of other members of AZHM, the anti-Zionist hate movement. One of the clearest ways to see this is on college campuses. The numbers are awful. Virtually all, 93% of Jewish students and recent alumni identify anti-Semitism as an ongoing serious concern on their campuses. The vast majority, 78% of students and graduates, say they avoided going certain places because they're Jewish. It gets worse. More than half of Jewish college students and recent alums say they were physically threatened or know someone who was physically threatened for being Jewish. This is madness, and it should be a wake-up call to all people. If you consider yourself a person committed to justice and fairness, then join this effort. There is a nonpartisan organization taking this on. It's specifically mobilizing to promote open dialogue, foster respectful debate, and challenge anti-Semitic rhetoric and incidents when they arise. Please join me in signing up to just get their emails so you learn about awesome stuff this group is up to. It's completely free, and for a limited time, each sign-up will help support They Stand Corrected, but only if you use the link in the show notes or newsletter. It's also up at my Instagram. Join the good fight. Please take 30 seconds to sign up today. The Trump administration's Department of Justice has subpoenaed a handful of New York Times journalists who worked on a story. They want the journalists to give up their sources. The Times has made clear that won't happen. Protecting sources is very important. And as long as those sources give you accurate, relevant information, there are times for anonymity. It should be rare, but it does have a place. This case brings together multiple issues, so I'll talk you through it. The Times ran a story about the plane that Trump unveiled as the new Air Force One. I've told you about that plane before. It's the $400 million gift from Qatar, which Trump apparently plans to keep for himself at his future library. The whole thing is corrupt and awful. If you didn't hear that episode, I encourage you to go back and listen to every episode of this show. All right, so the Times has now reported on security concerns about the new aircraft. The report said that Trump chose not to fly home from Ankara on that aircraft, and the Times had sources saying security concerns were the reason. Here is a clip from their article.
People briefed on the new plane's capabilities, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive security issues, said the new plane does not have all the features of the older plane.
It did not state specifically which security features are missing. The story had people explaining that getting all the same security features into the new plane would have taken longer than the administration allowed. And the report has this line.
Other government officials have told the New York Times that this more complex work includes advanced missile defense systems and hardening of the plane's wiring to protect it from an electromagnetic pulse, in case there is a nuclear strike. It is unclear whether such work was done to the Qatari jet.
Given threats against any U.S. president, how much should the media say about presidential security? The DOJ put out a statement saying every administration has addressed the crime of leaking national security information. It said it has to investigate these breaches and that journalists are not the target. The people leaking the information are. This DOJ statement said we value and appreciate the important role that the press plays in this country, but DOJ also plays an important role to make sure the people entrusted with our nation's secrets do what they're supposed to do with that information, which means not sharing classified information. The part there about valuing and appreciating the role of the media, that's a tough claim for this administration to pull off, given Trump's treatment of the press. But there surely are people in the DOJ who believe and mean that. When it comes to what to report, that is where subjectivity comes into play. If there are holes in the security on this plane, then you might think the last thing the media should do is let adversaries know that or give them any ideas, even just effectively from the reporting. But on the flip side, Trump did switch to the other plane for his flight back from Ankara. And maybe bringing these concerns into the public light will get the government to ensure that the new plane does have all the security it needs. I don't know which features, if any, are missing from this new plane, and neither does the Times, according to this report. Okay, so that's one issue. But this story also puts media failure in the spotlight. There has been so much coverage that leaves out everything that's happened in the past. They don't mention what I told you last week, how the Obama administration subpoenaed journalists and got their private phone records and emails. They're not taking you through the rest of the history either. Back in 1992, White House senior counsel subpoenaed Nina Totenberg and another journalist, Timothy Phelps, seeking information about their sources involving Clarence Thomas. The AP headline is calling the current actions by Trump unprecedented. And technically, that might be true in the sense that this instance could have new elements, like Apparently, the FBI director, Kesh Patel, orchestrated the operation to serve the subpoenas while he was at the White House instead of in his offices, which could indicate even greater involvement by a presidential administration than usual. But we can't know that because we don't know all the details of what's happened in every case in the past. Also, the fact that federal agents served these subpoenas at the reporters' homes. It does not happen that way in general. Journalists are informed through official channels involving their news agencies. Still, you need to know these previous cases because they show how to fight back, how the media has fought back against subpoenas in the past. And they serve as a powerful reminder that standing for press freedom requires a battle in every generation. As this episode comes out, there is a court hearing scheduled about all this. I will follow it. I'll update you in the newsletter, and I'll answer your questions about this and other topics. Message me either through the newsletter or the form at my website. Also, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Do all the things. That is how the apps recommend this show to more people, whether they consider themselves independents, Democrats, or Republicans. Let's beat the algorithm so we get the truth to people across the spectrum. As always, thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week.